So I'm going to start off by saying I have a couple of confessions to make. One being my schedule has been crazy the past week due to some unexpected circumstances. So my slides are text heavy, so I don't want to put you to sleep. I just want to forewarn you, I don't have snazzy pictures and all that stuff. I figure if nothing else, we can talk about what's going on in our little slice of the world at our association, and hopefully some of you will get some perspective from that, maybe get some tips for your own work. And my other confession is whenever I come to one of these events, I always get a little insecure because I hear the names like Springer or ASCO, even big publishers that I feel like maybe have probably already figured out a lot of what we're kind of slogging through. So hopefully this gives you some perspective in maybe you're experiencing some of these challenges or some of these developments in your own business as well. So ASHA is the American Speech Language Hearing Association. We represent audiologists, speech language pathologists, speech language and hearing researchers, a whole bunch of people, 191,000 members and affiliates. We have an increasingly international affiliation base, and it's a strategic priority to grow that international affiliation base as well. We've been publishing journals for about 80 years now. In fact, the journal really started our association way back in the 30s. We have this natural happy situation where our retention rate has been over 98% for more than a decade. So this presentation about aggregating content for member retention and growth, we've got the member retention part down, and we're lucky in the sense that that retention largely comes from a licensure situation where mostly the people who are our members, I don't want to say have to be members, but their careers are greatly improved by being a member with ASHA, getting certified with a certificate of clinical competence. So we have 4 journals. At the time I started, we had about 110, 112 employees. We now have about 290. We had about 106,000 members, and of course we're up to 191 now and growing about 5,000 to 6,000 a year. We, for years, had publications in a few different silos in the building. I started as the manager of the journals program, so we had our 4 journals, one of which was a biennial and very, very small and on kind of life support. We had one magazine, which at the time was called a tabloid, which is just an awful term, but it was basically a kind of wide thing that was folded in half. And members hated it because they couldn't keep it on their bookshelf and they couldn't tell what issue was what. So we also had a swath of publications for our special interest groups that were newsletters that were stapled and done in, I think, Quark Express. So things have changed quite a bit over the last 15 years or so. When I started, our journals were produced in PageMaker 6.5, and it wasn't even supported by Adobe anymore. So it wasn't too long before we saw the writing on the wall, and we decided to get on a platform. And, well, one main reason being that we were attempting to have online journals, but we could not routinely deliver them on our website in any sort of sensical fashion. So we couldn't do pay-per-view, we couldn't do IP authentication, a whole bunch of stuff. So we got on a platform, and a lot of our effort was spent around, getting the content ready for a platform, getting it, XML, doing some amount of backfile conversion, just a little bit. And so we did that, and for a few years we were building our workflows to jibe with that. And around 2010, 2011, just sort of realized we've built like a museum of our content. And it's all online, it's searchable, it's discoverable, but I didn't feel like it was making any real substantive difference in the busy clinician in their day-to-day in the field. And that's the vast majority of our members, probably, I don't know the percentage offhand, but we have about 5,000 researchers out of that 191,000, and not even all of them are members. So at the time, in the early part of the 2000s, you probably were aware that the push for evidence-based practice was gaining a lot of momentum. And I think it was especially so for a profession like ours, which had, even though an 80-year history of publishing journals, what would objectively be considered a developing evidence base. What would be very easily said is that SLPs and audiologists get results. There's no doubt about that. It's not necessarily understood how that happens, but it does. Actually, my son went to an SLP and started off 6 months behind in language development and finished off 8 months ahead. So it works. But the science in the manner which is needed for reimbursement and so forth wasn't necessarily there, and in many respects is still very much to be developed. So we had built our stacks, so to speak, and we needed to find a way to give tours to that content. That was my kind of metaphor for it. I was like, we have this museum, and I wanted to be able to pull out, let's say, collections of content. I felt it was too much of an ask for the busy clinician to dive into the journal's websites, go and do a good search, because at that time our search capability was not very good, and obtain information that they could then definitely discern something from, including where that piece of information fit in the arc of the literature, and where it fit in the arc of the evidence base, what was next, that kind of thing. So we were at this point where we were not really happy with what our platform could offer us in that regard. It was a bit too inflexible in creating collections, and the collections process was basically a very manual enterprise. So at that time, amazing, we got a new director of publications, and as it sometimes happens when you get a new person in, they have sort of a mandate, or the organization gives them a little latitude. So amazingly enough, we wound up getting a very expensive platform approved, absent any sort of strategic planning or anything like that. He managed to ram it through, and we proceeded in developing it. So those talks were happening around 2012. The contract period took quite a while. We got into development of the platform in earnest in 2013. So we were hoping that when we built this, one of the main things we wanted was to be able to connect the dots for the members. We know that busy clinicians need something more context-rich, something that tells them where this piece of research stands in the arc of the evidence for it. And we also know they valued case studies or things that show them how to actually put something into practice. So we had this magazine, which had just gotten redesigned from a tabloid into a magazine, and it's sent to every member, and they actually can't opt out of it, so it's great. But so they really value it, and it has sections in it that connect the members to the underlying research. So it was paramount that we got that publication onto the platform, but it wasn't exactly suited for that, because platforms are typically archival literature. They're very organized, like volume, issue, page number, that kind of thing, whereas the magazine is all kind of cut up as magazines are. There's a piece over here and a piece 20 pages later, that kind of thing. So our real challenge in making that migration to get the journals connected to the magazine was in finding a way to digitize that content, because they were not even really in the same sort of workflow, an XML workflow at all. So we managed to sort that out, and while we were at it, we wanted to make sure we connected those publications to our growing number of special interest group publications, which at the time had been officially moved, unfortunately, from being called newsletters to the amorphous term publication. So I always looked at that and I was like, what in the heck is a publication? I work in publications, but it doesn't do anything for me. So we scoped out the platform. with a major emphasis on topic collections. We wanted to be able to direct our members into that material they need, save them a step by not having them do all the searching and do all the pouring through issues and volumes and so forth. We know that really they would just attend to the latest DTOC or maybe go back a little bit when there's a particular situation they had time to look for something. So we went with a semantic platform, developed an extensive taxonomy for that, and we wound up building 40 topic collections, and we launched on, it's actually the Silverchair platform. We launched the magazine, the journals, and the Perspectives publications all at once in January of 2014. So that was a major undertaking. It gave us basically everything we needed to kind of burst onto the scene in terms of having a totally new product for them, a totally new way to connect to research, and while they're at it, discern more about it. And I kind of dance around the term for that, but really what I was talking about then was context. I wanted members, every time they saw an article, to see what it meant, if possible, and what it was connected to. So a key part of the platform was the related article recommendations, the topic collections that are built within publication as well as across publication. So if you're in one journal, you can see 40 topics just in that journal, or you could bounce out to the main umbrella site for the journals and see 40 topic collections across the journals. Or if you're out one level up and you're at the AshaWire platform level, you can see 40 topic collections spanning all the publications. So it gives you different ways to dive in. They're automatically updated. The semantic tagging is very precise. We vetted it quite extensively in our practices units and so forth, but it's still something that over time you need to kind of tune and hone. So the other part of it was responsive design. We were already seeing that mobile was about, 45 to 50% of our users. Is now more about 65%. When you think of the busy SLP in a school setting, for example, they're not sitting at desktop computers. And what I really wanted out of the platform was a point of care tool, but we had another initiative going on at ASHA which put a point of care tool into development at the same time. So I couldn't really swing that in the platform, but that's maybe something we're looking at down the road. So all our content's fully interconnected. We also launched the journals as a continuous publishing set of journals. We wanted basically to kind of divorce from this issue concept, this stacks kind of concept. We just wanted to have a straight pipe of content out to the user. We wanted to reduce the delays from, we had like a biennial journal. The article gets accepted in January, it wouldn't go out till June. So it was fairly ridiculous. The authors were not happy with that. And the users didn't care when it came out. They want the most recent stuff. So took care of that. And that had a lot of connections, obviously, to workflows and how we did our day-to-day. In fact, we were exploring other ways of even doing composition at that point, but kind of backed that up a little bit. So shortly after launching the platform, we discovered that that's a much different undertaking than we realized. That when we launched previously in 2005, it wasn't that big of a deal. We had print content, we digitized it, we uploaded it. There was some work, but I mean, it was fairly straightforward. This platform had a lot more moving parts to it, and it was much more complicated. And it took roughly a year of iterations to work ourselves through all that and get it to where we really wanted it to be. While we were at it, we went ahead and did what we could for backfile conversion. And the more that was one of those things where some of the XML things we were sorting out on the platform, we didn't necessarily want to just dive into on backfile just to have to do it again later. So through 2014 to present, we've been working on that to the point now where we've got 2 of our journals completely digitized. And one of the real reasons for this is not that people are just clamoring for the 1990 AJA Edge Report article, but It's that the more content you have running through the tagger, the more sophisticated the tagging algorithms become. So we committed to doing that. We did that across the board. We digitized the entirety of the magazine to the extent for the articles that needed it. The perspective stuff we digitized back to volume 7, where we had a quark implosion on some desktop and lost everything else long time ago. And so as we got going in the platform, we realized how in good shape we were for integrations with other important elements of the scholarly publishing landscape that was so rapidly changing. A key one really being the Altmetric badges. For me, that was like just I felt like a great addition, because if you're doing all this stuff to redirect people into topical navigation and ramping up discovery significantly in that sort of way, what a great add it is to offer some additional way to sift it, some quality signals. And so the Altmetric badge was really important. We got the Altmetric Explorer with that, so we could dive into the data on the back end and see how our content was faring versus stuff in the same categories or subject areas across all the other publishers. So as we got into that, it's sort of, I don't know, the tail wagging the dog a little bit, I guess, but start to get into that and you see more and more of an opportunity to track those conversations online, because the dashboard has every mention of the article and so forth. So we went ahead and reached out to a group in Australia that I learned about them just randomly one day when we had started our own Twitter account because we were told we couldn't have one, and I wanted one. So we started our own Twitter account and discovered that there was a group out in Australia that was very actively discussing SLP, CSD, communication sciences and disorders topics on a weekly basis through these moderated chats on Twitter. So in short order, we got to planning with them and seeing a tremendous amount of interest with them and success in getting our articles much more visibility. So we had a number of these kinds of things: Altmetrics, the We Speechies connection, that's the name of the group, the platform. These were significant changes in what we were doing, and I would say successes in what we were doing, which fed very nicely into what we then embarked on, which was a structured strategic planning process. It was something really aimed more at solving some peer-reviewed culture issues that we'd had over the years, where because we have such a small insular group of researchers, there tended to be kind of a feeling that it was a bit of a club and difficult to get into, that those reviewers, those editors were gatekeepers for the scientific theory that they happened to be proponents of. And so there were some bitter feelings over the years, and the other part was our editors were getting entirely frustrated with the process of running the journal, because all they ever did basically was try to find reviewers, try to find associate editors, take part and do the work. So their voice essentially had never been a part of the situation. They were just there processing papers. So our strategic planning process began in earnest in 2015, completed, got through all approvals at the end of last year, and had that terrifying moment in the board of directors meeting where they say, okay, so now you can launch all this stuff next year, right? And I'm like, no. So all of a sudden we had everything we had hoped for, we got, and it suddenly became, now do it next year. So that's why my slides are all text. No, just kidding. But in that strategic planning process, a really cool thing happened in that ASHA has a strategic pathway that has become very well structured in the organization. So as it was developing, we saw ways to tie our initiatives directly to, basically to map them over to their strategic initiatives. And that gave us a lot of pull when it came into those conversations. And that pull was amplified quite a bit by the virtue of the fact that we had some good successes with the launch of the platform. We launched on time, slightly over budget, but still decent. And we've seen anecdotally great feedback from librarians. All users were really positive on the launch of the platform. So, we had those things to hang our hat on, so to speak. And that was really important for us. And we're embarking on basically fundamental changes to our whole peer review structure. We've launched editorial boards January this year, which, previously we had the editor, associate editor, uncredited reviewer kind of model. So we're already seeing significant gains as a result of a lot of these things that we've been doing. We've reduced our peer review time now by roughly half. Our usage was up 15% last year. It's up 30% year to date. And I credit a lot of that to just our bigger presence, our connectedness of all the content. When somebody gets into the platform, they inevitably bounce from one article to the next and the next and the next. I've got a screenshot in here where someone's describing it as a rabbit hole, and I've heard that term used multiple times. So we're basically shifting our whole operations now to kind of shepherding this platform, where we have been for many years completely production focused. We had freelancers to deal with those unexpected influxes of content. We've never had page limits, which is kind of an unusual situation for a lot of publishers. So as we've become more visible and more successful, we've also sort of suffered from that in the sense that our submissions are like a hockey stick. I mean, we are publishing, I don't know, close to 400 articles. It was 330 last year, and we're already on pace to do 340 or something by June. So it's a crazy amount of growth. We don't have any way to or desire to limit it, really. It's tied in with ASHA achieving its larger strategic aims. So we have this great, privileged sensation that we're actually doing something the association wants, and people are excited about it, and it's giving us this momentum to kind of re-engineer all of our processes at this point. So what that's involving basically is fully outsourcing our production, finally, and looking at things in the future like XML first or Overleaf, those kinds of things. Basically, whatever we can do to shorten the turnaround times to compete with the bigger publishers. I mean, it's kind of scary now, but our authors complain when it's 3 months from acceptance to publication. And prior to all this switching, 9 months was allowed by formal resolution in the association. And occasionally we'd have to get special dispensation because we couldn't get enough freelancers. It was a nightmare, and it had to go to 11 months or something. So we're scrambling to get to 3 months. And we have editors of the journals who know full well what our plan is, hammering us well, when's it going to be 1.5 months? When's it going to be 30 days? And let me count the number of people over. There's 8 people in this unit. So we're kind of playing whack-a-mole sometimes, but it's good. It's on a really positive, good general arc up. And I'm like I said, I see it when we go to convention. Our members are enthusiastic. We have subject librarians and research methods teachers who just come up to me and talk about how much the first thing they talk to their grad students about is go to AshaWire right now. Go and you'll discover more than you ever could possibly want in there. So we have this luxury of having this platform, and we have this endorsement of basically outsourcing our production. So the question then kind of becomes, what do you do with all your days? So basically, what we are really focused on now is curation and promotion. We really feel like the opportunity is there for us to basically finally connect our members in the field to the research that matters to them most in a truly translational way. So we're aiming for things like author interviews, plain language summaries, improved accessibility standards. I've had people come up to me at conventions saying, this is great, but I can't see. And I'm like, oh, God. So we're at a communication association. So we have a lot of priorities. But we are really thankful from the sense that the industry is putting this out there for us. We're launching Figshare in a couple of weeks. We're psyched about that because we already have authors who are talking about sending us articles with 200 to 300 videos that they said they don't want to monetize them. They want it to be published by ASHA. And I was like, that's great. It's the 80-20 rule. In 20 years from now, 80% of the data is lost. We have to have journals that are subscription. We just don't have a business model that's open access, but we're very in support of open data. And I don't see any reason not to find a way to house our data in an open repository like that. And so we have a lot of plans for how to build those connections further, capitalize on that increased discovery. We've launched our own blog. We're learning as we go. And I've got a few things here. Some lessons we're finding right now is you've got to be nimble, opportunistic, and connected. And nimble is one thing right off the bat. Is like if you don't have to do production all day long, you can pivot to something that comes up. We had a situation just like that. We had a major RCT being published, and it was really basically the most important article that we've ever published. And we were able to marshal all our efforts on it and publish that. It's now got the highest altmetric score of anything we've produced. It's being talked about in policy situations. It's being part of the regulatory discussion for hearing aids. So lots of really good stuff like that. But in the past, we wouldn't have been able to work with that author. We would have basically tried as best we could. We would have really hoped that they could have provided us author interviews, for example, or translational materials. And in large measure, we want to cultivate that kind of mindset anyway, but we do need to be able to serve these people. And in fact, the author was a former editor of the journal. So as we're going along, we're learning how to do this. We're realizing what we need to have in place. It's kind of like I make a vegetable soup just about every Sunday, and the only way I'm able to do that with a 5-year-old running around is I chop stuff whenever I've got a moment. I'm just always chopping something. So you got to have the key ingredients in place if you want to do this kind of thing. If you want to be able to be nimble and hit something on the fly, you've got to have banners, you've got to have logos, digital materials, all kinds of things that you can pull into a campaign. You've got to have one-pagers you can direct people to. And we've built an academy site that we are increasingly directing people to. And it's the kind of information, it's new, it's different, it's not on the platform, but it's another way to pull people in from this whole swath of communications that ASHA has that we don't produce, but the various email newsletters and other publications that are not even on our floor. So there are all these opportunities, and in the past, I would say we took advantage of maybe 5% of the opportunities to do effective communications about the content. And that's unfortunate because, for an author, it's the be-all and end-all. They've worked for years on this article or this research project, and they give it to a publisher like us versus, let's say, BMJ or something. And we were, head down trying to produce the darn thing, and we couldn't really act on it the way we should. So now we're starting to see the ability to do that. We are engaging partners in this process. I feel like it's a valuable tactic to take up. I don't say it's a given for everybody, but in our view, when we were kind of building this entree into the visibility of our content, having that group in Australia, We Speechies, was huge. We got our Twitter following now up to 4,600 in the space of 2 years, and we're not, we're only following about 1,200 people, and that amplifies our message dramatically. It gives most articles some presence in the altmetric realm, and these focused chats, many of the people involved are our members, so they see the benefit of this. We're seeing our editors join Twitter just to be a part of this and so forth. But it's basically the influence the influencers model, and I can't stress enough how important that is. I know it's tempting to say, we want to control it all or we want to own it, but and maybe someday, we'll have our own journal clubs or our own discussions. That's labor-intensive stuff, and if somebody's doing it already, I don't care. I mean, great, give me some tweets. We have another person we're going to be working with soon she has a really popular blog and basically wants to feed us well-covered content from our journals. So I'm sure there's some particulars to iron out there, but these are the important relationships I feel like we need to be able to take it to that next level and really get some, very good traction for these kinds of initiatives. The other part that I would mention is that we've been lucky in that we've had virtually no turnover for probably 10 years in my unit. We've added a couple of slots, which has been good. But I can't stress enough how radically different what it is we're doing now versus what they were hired to do. And so it's really important to keep people in that loop, keep them oriented to all the changes that are going on and why they're going to need to change to adapt. And in many ways, it's also a tremendous opportunity for them. I've been lucky in that we haven't had some people who are just pound their fists on the table or something. We had a couple way back, but people see the opportunity there to learn things, learn new skills. I mean, people, doing manual XML coding on the fly and things like that, or doing interviews on Skype with someone in Australia. That's all really good stuff. I don't want to say for the resume because I don't want them to leave, but it's good stuff to have, and they're excited about it. The other aspect I would say that I didn't really cover here is there's a whole raft of materials that an organization like ASHA pushes out. We have so many information products, there's so many translational materials, and even in our own unit, there are 2 or 3 groups producing content, evidence maps, the National Center for Evidence-Based Practice, Evidence-Based Practice Compendium, there's the Practice Portal, all these good things, but we're literally not connected to them at all. So that's our next bunch of low-hanging fruit. I'm looking forward to building those connections more. As they've seen more about the platform, they're seeing the opportunity as well, so we're looking to make that happen. And that's about it. We're keeping our nose to the grindstone over there. Any questions?